So the director for ILO has delegated Rutabanzibwa from the same office, who is going to make the presentation. You are welcome, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a beautiful day in Kigali. As some of you may already have noticed and informed, my name is Anthony Rutabanzibwa. I'm Senior Programmer, Head of Programs for East Africa of the ILO. And I'm not Mr. Chibebe. There might be some similarities, as you may notice, but Mr. Chibebe is our Director covering East Africa. The purpose of me being up here is to run you through the report of the future of work, of which some of you may have already had time to peruse it online or having received hard copies. And as such, I'll try to be as brief as possible, since essentially we're going to have a panel discussion. If I may begin with just an introduction of the report itself for those who may have come across it for the first time. May I have the next slide, please? The report is a product of the Global Commission on the Future of Work, and the commission itself, under the auspices of the ILO, was created in 2017. And it was informed through its work by a number of outcomes through social dialogue at the global, national, and tripartite levels of our constituents on the future of work. On the eve, as the ILO was ascending to its centenary, this year we celebrate 100 years since our creation in 1919. This essentially, the work of the Commission essentially involved 120 member states at all levels of development to look into, including those countries that are found in fragility and in conflict. The 120 countries conducted their national dialogues on the future they wanted and the future of work as we hit 100 years. As we already know, at the dawn of the ILO in 1919, work has evolved. It's a totally different landscape as we look back today. And the idea was to essentially prepare ourselves for that. The Commission was headed by two co-chairs, the President of South Africa, His Excellency Cyril Ramaphosa, and the Prime Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven. I hope the Swedes, I got the pronunciation right. You forgive me if I haven't. They were joined by 25 commissioners appointed from ILO member states, who are all accomplished individuals and who are really experts when it comes to the world of work. 4 meetings were conducted between 2017 and 2018 of the Commission. As with one of the pillars of Decent Work Agenda, dialogue was key in articulating the findings of the reports and the way forward. Of course, it was called upon from the findings that it's time that the world seizes the opportunities that lie ahead in the next 100 years to adjust, to face some of the challenges that the Honorable Minister stated up here. Types of contracts, technologies, robots, etc. How do we fit in, or how we will fit in? The report is neither a technical nor an analytical report, but an examination of the future projections and scenarios. The report comes up with concrete recommendations within the framework of social justice for which the ILO was created in 1919. Next slide, please. The Commission's report is all about, or revolves around, working for a brighter future. We have always been concerned with the future, and in the world of work, it was decided that we should not lay back and just let the future take care of itself, because the changes are quite imminent. The recent years in the past are testament to that. At the launch of the report, it was marked by the beginning of the ILO centenary celebrations, as I pointed out, and of course, capture or appreciate the 100 years that we marked. 100 years is a very long time, and suffice to say that the ILO has faced the test of time. Our Constitution represents the most ambitious social contract in history, remembering that the creation of the ILO came from the ashes of the end of the First World War, and like in Greek mythology, it rose like the phoenix and flew into the horizon. I'm glad to say to date we're still flying, though we have had our problems and there have been challenges that have tested the middle of the ILO. Remember, the report also calls for, within the context of articulating the future of work, for our focus to be on a human-centered agenda that puts people and work together, and they do influence or have impact on the economic and social policies and business practices. More than often you hear focus on economic progress, profits in businesses, etc. Slipping through the cracks over the years, the ILO has noted, and the report acknowledges that the human face that makes things happen in the economic realm slowly fading away. It's time to bring that agenda centerfold. Next slide, please. So the human-centered agenda for the future of work has been pretty much stamped with approval in the report. And in essence, it focused on 3 key pillars. The first one being increasing investments in people's capabilities, which you may recall it augurs well with one of the points the Honorable Minister pointed up. And it seeks to take advantage of the opportunities ahead and prepare people for the realities that we will face. The second pillar is that on increasing investment in the institutions of work. And lastly, the third pillar, it seeks to increase investment in decent and sustainable work. There has been an increasing debate on whether decent work should first be parked somewhere while we focus on work or jobs. It's an interesting discussion. There are the pros and the cons. There are those who support the notion that we cannot talk about decency if there's no work. Well, the report paints another idea and provides some way forward in terms of how to articulate it. But as is the practice in the ILO, it's left to the member states to articulate the best way forward. And the ILO will be a partner in that journey. Next slide, please. The future of work human-centered agenda is really briefly unpacked in the following few slides. The first agenda pillar that I mentioned of increasing investment in people's capabilities makes four recommendations. The first one being lifelong learning for all, in the sense that there has to be a formal recognition of the universal entitlement to lifelong learning and the establishment of effective lifelong learning systems. We're proud to know that globally, countries have picked up the speed in terms of capturing this and institutionalizing it in the mainstream work of government in consultation with employers and workers and other stakeholders. Again, I thank you, Minister, for actually articulating that in your statement, which gives us hope that the more we work together in thinking these challenges through, already we've seen some green shoots in a number of countries in which the systems are now recognizing, for instance, skills of individuals who have never really quite seen the indoor of a classroom. But they're pretty good at what they're doing, and giving them those skills empowers them to be marketable and either employ themselves or be recruited elsewhere. The acknowledgement within this recommendation is that people need to reskill and upskill throughout their working lives. The tripartite approach is fundamental to achieving this, as well as education institutions, for they have complementary responsibilities in building an effective and appropriately financed lifelong learning ecosystem. Next slide, please. The second recommendation focuses on supporting people through transitions. As we know, we're constantly in transition in our lives, from school to work, etc. Now, the idea is that with the technological change, more transition is bound to happen, and in some countries it's already happening. The idea is to acknowledge these changes and point out and acknowledge that we're no longer assured of job for life skills. It's no longer guaranteed that we'll have permanent and pensional jobs in our lives. How do we adjust to that, or how do we prepare for those changes? Active labor market policies need to become proactive and anticipate and prepare workers for this process of this ongoing change. And the report really amplifies that point and encouraging the involvement of the stakeholders. Next slide, please. The third recommendation that comes out is one that has been a challenge of the ages, calling for transformative agenda for gender equality, in which formal recognition of a universal entitlement is in place that ensures equal treatment between men and women. The report seeks to make gender equality a reality. Simply persisting or stepping up existing efforts have proven not to work. On a serious note, we have to step up a gear or two. In the report, the Commission recommends transformative and measurable agenda for gender equality for the future of work. Statistics have shown, particularly in developing countries, where there have been equal or more women involved in the labor market and its operations, they have yielded more results and greater GDP. And it is indeed food for thought that how best can we domesticate it in other member states to actually get equal treatment of males and females within the labor market. In essence, the report points out, to achieve this, we start at home, within the homestead. How do we treat our sons and daughters? How are they brought up? With the parents. It's an acknowledgement that the home is where everything begins. And it calls upon everybody, including parents, to actually play their part in ensuring that the notion of equal and gender equality begins in the homestead. It also calls upon us to face it, that if women continue to bear the brunt of care work and family responsibilities in the household, how will they really partake in the labor market? It will not be a playing level field. Of course, the males will have an advantage. So that recommendation has been put up for us to articulate and domesticate and make it happen. Next slide, please. The fourth recommendation is that of strengthening social protection. Universal social protection, from, as we say, from the womb to the tomb. Social protection covers us all the way until we return to our Maker. The report calls for universal social protection from birth to old age, including basic social protection floors to everybody in need. It's good to note that, particularly in East Africa, the countries that we cover have really stepped up their interventions in social protection. Some countries now have universal pension scheme, reforming the structure, the governance structure, and particularly merging the institutions responsible for social protection. We are continuing to work with that, and it's good to see that it's already firmly on the agenda of the countries of East Africa that we cover. Next slide, please. The second pillar I referred to earlier on is that of increasing investment in institutions of work, which puts on the table 4 recommendations. The first one of which, establishing a universal labor guarantee that ensures that all workers, regardless of their contractual arrangement or employment status, enjoy certain basic guarantees. You need to look no further than the preamble of the ILO, which states that, by the way, this is 1919, whereas universal and lasting peace can be established only if it is based upon social justice. It is my anticipation that you would agree that even today, these words ring very relevant in what we see, the condition we see the world is in today. So, besides that, it actually focuses on fundamental workers' rights and adequate living wage. An adequate living wage, you won't find it defined in any ILO instrument, but for as long as there's social dialogue, We call upon the relevant parties, particularly employers and workers, to negotiate and agree on, including the government, to negotiate and agree on a living wage that every working woman and man worldwide would have enough to have 3 squares of meals, send their kids to school, and actually live a decent life. So it's important to factor that in because it does have bearing or is influenced by the world, by the future of work. The report also calls for a reinvigoration of the global social contract that guarantees these basic labor protections on all who work. Next slide, please. Within the context of the report, it is called for increasing investment in institutions of work. And these institutions cover regulations, labor administration institutions, minimum wages, collective agreements, trade unions, and the right to organize and employers' organizations, which, interestingly, are embedded in all the constitutions of the countries, particularly in East Africa and many around the world. So it's good to actually invigorate them, not to create new ones, but to strengthen those institutions so that they are in line to ensure that the world of work does work for the benefit of the working men and women globally. The issue of digital technologies has also often been factored in and is continuing to roll out as we see, which is changing the way in which work is organized and monitored. Already discussions have happened in a number of countries of the role of labor inspection in a digitized workplace. Who's the employer? Working conditions, etc. We are called upon, we are all reminded that within that context, we should always remember that labor is not a commodity. That we will also find in the ILO's constitution and the Declaration of Philadelphia of the ILO of 1944, and that labor is not a robot. It's the reality of the day. Hence the need to strengthen the capacity of these institutions to address the challenges associated with these statements. It's also key to addressing widespread economic insecurity and reducing inequality and forging pathways to formalization from informalization. The statistics, facts and figures speak for themselves. The majority of the working men and women in, if I may speak for ourselves, in East Africa are found in the informal economy. And hence beyond the ambits, the realms of labor administration services, social protection and the like. The idea of formalizing them gives them a chance to also receive the services which are essentially their rights and also finding their place in the next 100 years within the context of future of work. Next slide, please. The second recommendation made under this pillar is that of expanding time sovereignty. As the picture shows, there's a lot of multitasking, not only for the females, the working women, also for the working men. And there is a need to acknowledge that there has to be a balance between work and family responsibilities. As such, the report calls upon us to take advantage of technological developments in work organization and afford greater time sovereignty to workers so that they can better balance their work and private lives, which may also include flexible hours. Research has shown that increasingly companies are allowing those flexible hours where workers could actually work from home. Doesn't have to, they can still make the 8-hour work period, but not necessarily in a confined space like an office. Of course, subject to dialogue, social dialogue, that possibility is there. But it's important to note that because as we go, technology has now allowed somebody working in Bangkok whilst being employed by the office somewhere in South America. The working hours are quite different, but they're still in line, which allow those kind of working arrangements. Something worth considering. Next slide, please. The third recommendation calls for us to revitalize collective representation. The essence of freedom of association is key. It cannot be understated. And as you see on the slide, the ILO being the only UN institution that has a tripartite structure in which the employers, workers, and the governments are represented on an equal footing. This recommendation underscores the essence of strengthening collective interest representation, which is the foundation for which remain in democratic representation of the interests of employers and workers. Employers are reminded or called upon to reinforce their capacity to service increasingly diverse interests. Now, I'd like to put a caveat. The employers is construed synonymously with businesses. So it's not that like the business community is being left out. Together they're called upon to reinforce their capacity to service increasing diverse demands in the labor market. Workers' organizations need to consider the adoption of innovating organizing techniques. The usual traditional bargaining that has been going on for quite a long time is time to expand, particularly in a good number of African countries. That it could be, for many years it's been, as they say, the bread and butter, but now to venture into the economic realm, to influence policies that have bearing on the world of work and science, if need be. As the digital world takes hold, it would be good to be part and parcel of that discussion when the time comes, or if it is ongoing, to also influence the impact on the world of work. The report makes the point that while there's much to be gained from forging alliances with non-governmental organizations and other organizations for the trade unions, there's no substitute for organizing. Trade unions, employers' organizations are key to remain in existence and fulfilling your obligations. To the governments, the report amplifies the need for them to guarantee freedom of association and effective recognition of collective bargaining. One needs not to go no further than the reports of the ILO supervisory bodies, which pretty much paint a picture when it comes to freedom of association. There's a lot of room to improve on, but the government has that oversight role of guaranteeing those freedoms. It's good to note that several countries have ratified, for East Africa, all the countries have ratified Convention number 154 on organizing and international labor standards. The fourth recommendation, if I may go to the next slide, please, is on technology for decent work. And the notion here is to use technology to support decent work and a human-in-command approach to technology. Not to be replaced, but to work in collaboration with this technology coming in. Digital technologies can be used to improve conditions of work, as alluded earlier on, in hospitals, in businesses, etc., in transport. But it would be very important to ensure that it has the human-in-command approach. It is recognized, the report recognized that digital technology and decent work, digital technology will ensure well-being at workplaces and improve functioning of the labor markets. The ILO is called upon on the report, ILO as an organization, the tripartite structures I referred to earlier on, employers, workers, governments, and the Secretariat, to establish an innovation lab to make this happen. It's one of the areas that we'll see how best it can happen, particularly at the national level. Next slide, please. The third component of the human-created agenda of future of work is that of increasing investment in decent and sustainable work, which has two recommendations. The first one, namely being transforming economies to promote decent and sustainable work. It calls for countries to prioritize investments in transformative areas, and those areas that have the highest potential payoff in terms of decent, sustainable jobs. As such, focus ought to be is recommended to be in the rural economy, which, as I mentioned earlier on, the majority of the working men and women are found, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, and the care economy and the green economy in light of the challenges associated with environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. The second recommendation is that of shifting incentives towards a human-centered business and economic model. The call under this recommendation is for reshaping of those incentives to encourage long-term investments in the real economy. The reshaping of those incentives is essential because human-centered agenda cannot be accomplished if the overriding incentives for business are all directed toward short financial targets and shareholder expectations. Bringing in the human factor, once again, is key. A broader measure is needed to capture the impact of productive activities on the environment, unpaid work, equality, and other aspects of the human well-being. Remember, the SDG mantra is very clear. No one will be left behind. And it's in this context that that recommendation is being tabled. After all is said, though yet to be done, how should we go about implementing the recommendations? Next slide, please. Well, in essence, the report calls upon the stakeholders to take responsibility. We need to take responsibility for the world we are in, and of course for the future we want. And in taking responsibility, it should be in terms of building a just and equitable future of work. Secondly, by reinvigorating the social contract. Human rights is a common theme throughout all we do. It is weaved into the fabric of articulation of the future of work, and it's key to keep that at the core of our initiatives. The Commission calls for a dedicated reinvigoration of the social contract, not a new social contract. It recommends that the countries establish national strategies on the future of work. We're glad to note that that has already begun, particularly for the national dialogues we've had in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. Thirdly, it calls upon increased ILO as an organization, the constituents plus the secretary of the ILO, to upscale and adhere and promote international labor standards for which they were actually created in 2019 forward to ensure that the world of work works for the people who are actually working in the labor market, including those in the informal economy. The responsibilities and challenges of the multilateral system cannot be overlooked, and the report calls for an increased collaboration between the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Trade Organization, and the ILO. We're glad to know that at the global level, dialogue does take place amongst those institutions, and we will continue as we continue to see how best we all work for mankind, humankind. Next slide, please. In conclusion, therefore, the report so concludes that in essence, the two main conclusions that stand out are one, that the future of work is hinged on choices. As I alluded to earlier on, the meetings that have taken place in the Commission, the national dialogues that have happened globally, they set on the table a number of choices that we have to decide which ones we should prioritize. So, it's up to us to make the right choices. Secondly, the ILO's unique tripartite structure, which brings together the constituents, governments, employers, and workers, not to rule out non-governmental organizations and other stakeholders, but to bring them together and actually be in a key position to serve as a compass for the journey that lies at the new frontier that we're about to embark on for the next 100 years. Now, it may not necessarily sink in right now, that we've just accomplished 100 years. But I'd advise you just go to the ILO website and you'd see where we've come from, where we are, and part of this discussion will be where we're going. And on that note, next slide, please. As is often said, 1,000 miles starts from beneath one's feet, one step. I believe us being here today is one step, hopefully in the right direction, for the benefit of the working men and women of Rwanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anthony, for the very good presentation on the Global Commission report on the future of work. I'd like to request Mr. Francois Ngoboka to step forward and give his brief presentation on how this report can be put in the national context. What can we do when? While he's coming, Francois Ngoboka is an experienced expert in labor and employment matters. Since last 10 years, has been working for the ministry as Director of Labor Research and Employment, then promoted to the Head of National Employment Programs, and now he's the Head of Targeted Labor Market Interventions in the Rwanda Development Board. So you are welcome. I think with all this deserved experience, he will try to use the time, maximum 10 minutes. Thank you, Francois, you are welcome.
Thank you, Faustin. Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, I'm honored to present to you the contextualization of the future of work, global report. Next. Next again. Yeah, the contextualization of the future of work starts with how the National Development Agenda mainstream the requirements to achieve the good working conditions, decent work, and sustainable jobs. As you can see, the National Strategy for Transformation has highlighted that 1.5 million productive and decent jobs in next 7 years are going to be created. This being highlighted in National Development Agenda, it's a high-level commitment and engagement of making sure that the future of work is sustained and jobs to be created are going to be decent and productive. I would like also to mention that there are deliberate and decisive actions to mainstream employment in sectors and investment promotion and macroeconomic policies. It doesn't mean that it's something that has been achieved, but what is very important to mention is that high-level commitment and engagement to work towards that goal. I would also want to mention that our country is enhancing demographic dividend through improved universal access of healthcare and access to quality education, which is a very important pillar of capability approach to develop the future workers enabled to navigate through the digital world. It is also very important to mention that the domestication and enforcement of fundamental and enforcement of fundamental principles and rights at work, which is involving engaging social dialogue institutions spearheaded by the National Labour Council. Next. We cannot talk the future of work without highlighting where the future jobs are going to come from, in which sectors. As that graph highlights, you can see that the service sector is going to lead, and the key message is that more than half of jobs which are going to be created in the service sector are going to be ICT-enabled occupations, which is a strong message that the digital world is going to shape job creation in the next years. On this slide, I can also mention that the driving sectors to spur growth of job creation are going to be agro-processing, horticulture, light manufacturing, mining, construction, tourism and hospitality, knowledge-based services, and creative arts. Next slide, please. The capability approach is a very important pillar to make sure that the future of work objective is achieved and sustained. On that, I would like to mention that lifelong learning, that was earlier highlighted by ILO representative, that enables people to acquire skills, to reskill and upskill across all age groups is a very important cornerstone. Thus, promoting learning ecosystem that instills recognition, cognitive skills, and continuous learning to navigate through technology advancement is very important. I would like to mention that in our country context, the early childhood development, students-centered learning, on-job training, smart classroom, and e-learning are going to be key activities to effectively implement and improve for the lifelong learning objective. I would also to mention that the future skills entail complementary skills. It is being evidenced that marginal productivity is being highly influenced by complementary skills. Those are the complementary skills to the foundational depend, regardless of the academic background and fields of education someone has pursued. Those complementary skills involves complex problem-solving skills, process skills, which include critical thinking, active listening, system skills, and cognitive skills involving logical reasoning and creativity. Understanding the requirement of industries and labor market signals for real-time adjustment is also a very important intervention. Thus, partnership bringing together employers, association, education providers, and the key players to provide responsive training are very important. And we salute initiatives that have started but needs more strengthening, involving sector skills councils, which are supposed to be platform bringing together practitioners, private sector investors, education providers, and key players in the field. Next slide, please. I would like also to talk about the opportunities and the challenges for the future of work. I may not go through all bullets due to time constraint, but let me highlight something. The future of work is going to be shaped by the change of the business model and the jobs nature, which are increasingly changing the way the governance and the labor relation have been happening. currently, nature of jobs are emerging whereby there is no employer-employee relationship. I think I can, some examples to highlight that. Today, Abba, I think you know Abba, the world's largest taxi company, owns no taxi cab. Another example would be like the Airbnb, which is a high-end apartment in the hotels for vacation and other purposes, which is the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. Today, the Nike, the world's footwear producer, does not own any factory, which means they don't care about the governance of job being created in where they are outsourcing their product. So there is a need to revamp and reinvigorate labor governance to make sure that the current system govern those kind of jobs which are increasingly emerging. Crowd working websites, app-mediated work promote digital day laborers without employer-employee relationship. So there is a need for responsive social protection and social security based on the principles of solidarity and risk sharing. Thanks to the current initiated long-term savings scheme, Ejo Heza, which is a matching grant to people at the most vulnerable quantiles, and also recently reviewed social security law that has enacted the way the informal sector is going to be covered. Interconnectivity will increase the diffusion of technology innovations. The race to 5G will revolutionize artificial intelligence performance. Honorable Minister mentioned, I think last week, Sophia humanoid. I think you have realized how the robot can delay to respond or delay to make a sign. This is due to the level of connectivity using 4G today. With 5G race, the deficiencies of robot and humanoid are going to be addressed, which is going to change tremendously the way jobs are being planned. But there is also a good news. Youth are harnessing the benefits of digital economy, creating innovative solutions, and with automation, no heavy investment is required compared to the last year's period of mass production. With 5 computers, a business can start and sustain. Let me also end this opportunity and challenge slide by mentioning that the labor cost reduction in the impact on aggregate consumption and power structure is also very important to mention. The value created is going to increase inequalities as the value created disproportionately skewed towards owners of capital at the expense of the owners of labor. Next slide, which is the last. the institutional and infrastructure support. It is very important to mention what the country context is doing in terms of creating a conducive environment to attract investment that generates sustainable and decent jobs, and with local content supply and production streams. Rwanda is sustaining the improvement in doing business. In the last 10 years, the ranking improved from 126 to 29th worldwide, and the investment registration is constantly responding. Last year, investment registration increased by 25% as per the Rwanda Development Board report. Let me highlight also that there is a need, a very strong need, to have a strong social dialogue platform. In the Rwandan context, the National Labour Council is playing at national level that role, and the tripartite constituencies is being recognized and enforced along the production value chain. The future of work means also a lot for sector, for informal sector workers and agriculture producers. The country context is to strengthen rural transport networks and extension services to enrich the expansion of market-oriented agriculture, to be able to lift out of poverty 30% of working age population engaged in subsistence agriculture. Thank you very much. Next slide is the motto: to have more productive and decent jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Francois, for a very comprehensive presentation. Honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure and a good news to young labor market entrants that honorable ministers, members of parliament, private sector practitioners and federation, civil society, international labor organization, universities, and the local government are seated here thinking about the future of work. The happiness of our young people depends on the employment. While seated here thinking of their future, it is a very good news to them, and it's a very good news to everyone. You allow me to invite our special panelists who are going to discuss on the future of work and what is really meant to Rwandans. I will start with Ms. Kampeta Pichet Sayinzoga, the current Director General of National Industrial Research and Development Agency. She has a very big experience in not only in government institutions but also in multilateral organizations. Ms. Pichet serves as Director General in the National Industrial Development Agency under the Ministry of Trade and Industry, MINICOM. And she was previously the Director of Cabinet of the Prime Minister's Office of Rwanda. Prior to that, she served 7 years as the Permanent Secretary and Secretary to the Treasury of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning of Rwanda. Mrs. Sayinzoga served as the chairperson of on the boards of PTA Bank, the East African Development Bank, Rwanda Yellow Bond Committee, and also National Capacity Building Secretariat. She also served on other various boards as director, such as Rwanda Revenue Authority and MTN Rwanda. Ms. Sayinzoga holds a master's degree in economics development and a policy analysis from University of Nottingham in Nottingham, United Kingdom. You are welcome to the panel. Allow me also to welcome Godfrey Kabera, who is currently Director General in charge of National Development Planning and Research at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning of Rwanda. A post he has been held since 2013. He has more than 13 years experience in the development planning and has been extensively involved in crafting of various strategies at national level, including the revised Vision 2020, ADPRS both 1 and 2, and also National Strategy for Transformation. He is also part of the team working on the draft Vision 2050. Godfrey, you are welcome. Allow me also to welcome Mr. Manzi Eric. Manzi Eric, he holds a master's in labor laws, but also in electrical engineering. He is currently the Secretary General of Rwanda Trade Union Confederation, CESTRAL, affiliate to the International Trade Union Confederation since 2001. This means 18 years of experience. He is also Vice Chair of Rwanda Labor Council and member of several commissions, substitute member of ILO governing body, and actually chair of Sub-Regional Trade Unions Confederation of West Africa. He has also participated in the development of the Global Report on the Future of Work. You are welcome, Mr. Manzi. Allow me to welcome Mr. Stephen Ruzibiza, who is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Rwanda Private Sector Federation. Mr. Ruzibiza has been helping PSF since 2015. He has gained broader experience in the areas of trade, investment, and export promotion. And prior to come to the PSF, he was the company secretary and head of legal unit at Rwanda Air, where he was in charge of legal affairs in the company. He was further instrumental member of the team that transformed the airline which began operating in 2009. Prior to joining Rwanda Air, Mr. Ruzibiza was the State Attorney of the Ministry of Justice in the Legal Advisory Services Department. Mr. Ruzibiza is the current chairman of Prime Holdings Limited, National Health Insurance Council, and sit on the various boards of directors. Mr. Stephen has a Bachelor's of Law degree from Makerere University, Uganda, 2002, and a diploma in legal practice in the Law Department Center, Kampala, Uganda. He has also another degree in law from Tilburg University from Netherlands. Mr. Stephen, you are welcome to the panel. Allow me to also welcome ILO. You are welcome, Mr. Director. We are honored to have you here in this very important conference on the future of work. Mr. Chibebe Wellington is the director for ILO country office in Dar es Salaam. He's the director for the United Republic of Tanzania, Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. He joined ILO in that position in 2018. Prior to this current assignment, since 2011, Mr. Chibebe was the Deputy Secretary General of the International Trade Union Confederation Worldwide, ITUC, based in Brussels. For the last 16 years, he has fully participated in the International Labour Global Conference and the partnerships. Mr. Chibebe started his work earlier at the National Railways in Zimbabwe as apprentice, further in 1984, and qualified in 1988 as a diesel planter. He was elected Secretary General of Zimbabwe Congress Trade Unions, where he gained valuable knowledge and experience in policy development, implementation, and occupational safety and health. Mr. Chibebe holds a bachelor's degree in law from the University of South Africa and has authorized several publications in his various areas. So you are welcome, Director. You are going to allow me to introduce, before we go to the panel, I just want to make a brief recap on the future of work and the insight that will allow us to start the presentation. As we think of the future of work, allow me to give a brief insight on the future of work global report. New forces are transforming the world of work today. The transitions involved call for decisive action. Countless opportunities lie ahead to improve the quality of working lives. Expand choice, close gender gap, reverse the damages weakened by global inequality, and much more. Yet none of this will happen by itself. Employment promotion must remain the top priorities in current and future development agenda. Without decisive actions, we'll be heading into a world that widens existing inequalities and uncertainties. Technology advances. Artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics will create new jobs. But those who lose their jobs in this transition may be the least equipped to seize the new job opportunities. Today's skills will not match the jobs of tomorrow, and the newly acquired skills may quickly become obsolete. The greening of our economies will create millions of jobs as we adopt sustainable practices and clean technologies, but other jobs will be disappeared as countries scale back their carbon and resource-intensive industries. So all those things, what you can say, we need to seize the opportunities presented by these transformative changes to create a brighter future for our young people and deliver economic growth and security. Equal opportunities and social justice and ultimately reinforce fabric of our societies. The job creation must remain among the top priorities of all governments as a key tool for economic transformation and development. Rwanda has set a very significant job creation target. That is creation of 1.5 million jobs by 2024. What does it mean? That will respond to the currently 225 new labor market entrants every year. So now, while we are discussing on the future of work, I would like to also refer to our national strategy transformation target and also try to see how we can contextualize the global report on the future of work. Which works, which can't work, how? My first question goes to Mrs. Piet. While the entire world is thinking of the future of work and challenging a dynamic environment, where do you think the jobs of the future will come from mainly to respond to the growing supply of the labor market entrants? Who freshly joined the labor market every year? Maybe you link it with investment. How do we really invest in our future through thinking of the future investment, also think of the new labor market entrants? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ministers, dear participants. I think I'll answer your question in the Rwandan context because it's very different from what we've seen and a lot of what is being discussed at the global level. If you look at the numbers in terms of where the jobs being created in Rwanda, then you'll find that most of the new jobs that have been mentioned are actually coming from micro enterprises. They're not coming from big conglomerates that are going through large level of automation. So I think the challenge of Rwanda is completely different from the challenge that we see in the developed world that is being amplified through some of these global reports. So the risks that automation will wipe out jobs, I think if we think about what a micro enterprise looks like in Rwanda, is not very big. Now we do have some industries or some sectors where some jobs may be lost. Recently we've done an intervention in banana wine, for example, which is one of my favorite sectors these days. Banana wine is one of our largest employers in terms of industry, but a lot of employment is through bottle washing. Now, we're helping them automate to cut costs, to be more efficient. Those jobs inevitably will be lost. But as we grow the company, their distribution networks are getting wider. So the ladies that used, because most are ladies that used to do the bottle washing, can actually be retrained to become members of the distribution networks and be part of logistics. So in the context of Rwanda, I'm not sure that jobs necessarily need to be lost, but rather the growth of the company will trigger different types of jobs. Now, if you ask me for my opinion, I think a job in the logistics value chain is a more decent job than bottle washing. So if we do this right, if we prepare our people right, the kind of jobs that will be lost may not necessarily need to be jobs that are of a higher value than those that we create. The biggest challenge that we will have, I think, is not so much related to automation, but more as to how do we use automation and technological advance to create new value chains that in turn create new jobs. I just want to take you very briefly to the definition of, I think in this report of the future of work, they say, why does work matter? And they identify 4 particular features. And I'd like the audience to think about themselves for a minute. They say most people want to work for 1, psychological stability. So if you think of people who work in Rwanda, how many actually achieve psychological stability in their work? Question mark. 2, social integration. I think that's something where we do really well. Most of the people who have formal employments in Rwanda see their employment community or their fellow employees as a social network. 3, personal freedoms. How many of us feel that work is actually a tool for personal freedom? I'm sure if we did a survey, we're not doing so well in that field. And then 4, it provides autonomy by allowing us to afford what we want to afford. So those are the definitions of decent work. Now, if we apply it to the local context, how many Rwandans can we say have decent work if you look at those 4 features? For me, that is the biggest challenge that we have. Rather than being worried that repetitive work are going to be replaced by automation. We have one particular feature, which I think is a challenge in terms of our economy. Ngoboka talked about it, is our labor productivity is very low. It's actually lower than sub-Saharan African average. We rarely talk about it, but I think it's a big issue. Because you asked me to talk about investment, but capital flows productivity. If by deploying $1, you do not get return on that dollar because your labor productivity is very low, then it's a hard call to actually get the kind of capital that we want in our country. So one of the issues that we have is labor productivity.
When you talk about productivity, yes. I'm trying to think of skills.
Yes.
Because we're wondering, if the productivity is low, is it really associated with skills? So considering the future of work, what will be the required skills for us to meet the demand in job creation? Because we cannot talk about job creation without talking about skills. Do you think there's some adjustment needed, or what do you think we need in terms of new skills for the future?
So based on what we see, at least in the manufacturing and industrial space, I think there are 3 types of skills that are missing. One is managerial skills. They are very, very low currently. If you look at the way our businesses are being managed, small or big, we still have big gaps on managerial skills. 2 is problem solving, which is something that is a challenge via our education system. And I see the Minister of Education, it's probably one of his biggest headaches, is how do we change our style of teaching, not only the curriculum. People talk a lot about the curriculum, but the curriculum is not as important as the teacher in the classroom. So how do we get our teachers to actually instill a spirit of creativity, problem solving, and some of the core, I would say problem-solving skills are the biggest problem. Language is an issue, but it's not such an issue. I mean, if you think about it, many countries have managed to develop without having, English skills or French skills. The Chinese guy who does our road doesn't speak English. But if you have the right level of problem solving, the right level of critical thinking type of skills, then you can adapt, even if your language is not to the top. I'm not saying that language is not important, but the other skills are now proving to be more and more important. Our education system is very occupation-based, which is a challenge because, as you've seen, the type of jobs that one will have to do in one lifetime is likely to be 2 or 3. So if you teach somebody just to be a plumber and there are no plumbing opportunities in 15 years, what do you do with this person? They will not be at the age of pension, they still need to be active. So the way we teach those skills to allow people to be versatile and move from one job to another is going to define whether we're able to raise labor productivity over time or not.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. Coming back to the technology, Honorable Minister in her speech quoted the OECD report whereby 15% of jobs have been lost because of technology in the industries, but 26 of them, if I remember well, have been employed in services. That is a very positive trend, almost double of jobs because of technology. Do you believe technology will push us to lose employment, or we can make use of employment. If you can look at, for example, the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence that we are currently facing, is the Rwandan market prepared enough to align with the new global technologies advancement positively or negatively, or what can be done?
Thank you, Moderator. Honorable Ministers and distinguished guests. I think the Rwanda has actually moved beyond the debate on whether technology is harmful or whether technology is beneficial, especially with regard to jobs. We've actually seen, as you've mentioned in the numbers, that what people used to fear that these technologies are going to bring loss in employment has actually led to increases in employment. I think the most important thing is how do we manage the transitions, as the previous speaker mentioned. When people are moving from low technology jobs to higher technology intensive jobs, how do we manage that transition so that they find spaces where they can actually work within those same sectors? I mean, if you look at one of the examples, simple examples which we've had in the past, when we brought in mobile technology, access to different services online, many people expected that people who used to offer these jobs, perhaps in offices or elsewhere, would lose a lot of jobs. But actually, we've seen much more jobs being created, for example, through the Irembo online service delivery, which is a platform in Rwanda where people can access different government services online. We've seen a lot on mobile money agents. We've seen, so there's a lot of potential for that. And I think the important thing is, as was mentioned before, how do we develop our youth, especially because they are the major entrants into the labor market? How do we tailor what they do today to make sure that they are not coming in with a mindset of fighting this technology, but rather looking for ways to adapt to it? So that comes back to the issue of creativity, that comes back to the issue of critical thinking, problem solving, innovation. I think those are some of the key things that we have to focus on. Of course, the other thing that's going to help us to create jobs in an age of technology is to focus on productivity. Again, that goes with the National Strategy for Transformation, where we're looking at productivity increases, both in terms of increased productivity for individuals and increased productivity for firms. I think combining the two, looking at those two approaches, we'll definitely find a solution to some of those issues that you have.
Thank you very much. As someone who has been dealing with the national planning of this country, when you developed the NST1, you just said 1.5 jobs will be created, and you've stated the sectors. For it to, are you still optimistic that those jobs, 1.5 million jobs, will be created? And maybe what can we really have as a takeaway in terms of the sectors that we think will drive this job creation? Because we have private sector people here who may see the potentials of the sectors, and that there is a government incentive. So what can you say about this?
Well, for a start, it was not just a number picked from the air. I think there was quite some analysis done, and we've seen that even from the last labor force survey of 2018, we actually exceeded the 200,000 jobs, which is a good sign that we are on track. And this was one of the first surveys that has been done with a new definition of employment, where we are actually excluding things like subsistence agriculture. So there is a lot of potential to achieve these jobs. I think the most important thing, as I mentioned, is how do we address the issue of productivity. From a labor force point of view, if you look at even those that are employed, there are issues like underemployment. So how do we increase time in employment and output from employment? I think those are some of the critical issues. If you look at other sectors, that one of the important things maybe we've we are not just looking at off-farm employment this time. We're also considering on-farm employment, but looking at productive off-farm employment. So that means a decent job on farm. That's why we are excluding things like subsistence agriculture, because that's not considered to be a decent job. But there is a lot of potential to achieve that. We need to look at certain things that are important. Private sector, working with the private sector, supporting the private sector through to access investment, finance, technology. There's a number of initiatives that are ongoing, especially when we think about the future we have just talked about in relation to things like technology. Rwanda has already adopted that as one of the things that it's going to hinge its development on, because we are in transition. As the report says, transitions are happening already. Rwanda has already seen part of that transition, with people moving from agriculture to industries and services. There's a time we had almost 90% of the labor force in agriculture. Now we have, we're almost, at least on a seasonal basis, we can even go up to below 60% of the active labor force being in agriculture. So those transitions are happening. Access to finance, as I mentioned, is important. Technology support to access technology and scale up on use of technology can actually do a lot to create jobs. One of the other important things for Rwanda is also in respect to innovation and technology. We are setting up an innovation fund that is actually going to support private sector to deepen the investments in the space of technology and innovation. So those are some of the examples where we are actually focusing.
Yeah, thank you very much. You talked about private sector. I heard very well that with the shift, with the transition from agriculture industries to services, we can be optimistic that the technology is not a threat, it is rather an opportunity for Rwanda. I just want to go to PSF. They said it's always private sector-led economy. And from the statistics perspectives, 94% of Rwandans now are employed by the private sector. So being a private-led economy, what do you think will be required in the future from government in creating favorable, enabling, and conducive environment for the private sector to respond to the job creation needs? So I think, while also thinking of that, also refer to the question that 91% of those jobs created by private sector, they are informal. So two questions. How are you going to achieve the target of decent jobs? Also recognizing that the current jobs, we have some, quite a number of them in informal, because they have to go in line. Do we have a plan for smooth transition? I think we really need to hear from the private sector the strategy to keep that good momentum of reading in the job creation.
Thank you, MC. Thank you, Honorable Ministers. Faustin has asked, what does it take? Can I? Thank you once again. Thank you, Honorable Ministers, MC. True, private sector is really the economy. True, private sector is contributing the high percentage in terms of employment. It's also true that private sector is highly leading in terms of innovation. It is not disputed that globally, whatever happens in terms of changes or like this we are discussing, private sector has a hand. So like it or not, it is a sector that we have to do with from today until we go back where we came from. So what does it take, or what is needed to keep the momentum? One, not to make a step backwards. That means if it is going to be policy change, if it is going to be legal frameworks, private sector is still needed on the table in terms of planning and in terms of implementation. My predecessors have talked about the needed skills. In these businesses, if you are talking about technologies, it is a labor component. If you are talking about intelligence robots, they are doing the work of the industry labor they need. So a private person in business is primarily not concerned with the labor productivity, how much staff I'm going to employ. When they are doing the to-do checklist, that comes in when they are doing computation of their labor productivity. How much am I going to pay? How many employees do I need to do this kind of services? So if he or she can get it at the cheaper cost, the better. So where does he or she get the incentives to employ more, be decent jobs or not? It is again working with the government. Be the service providers like education, they have to be aligned with the market demands. When I was reading the theme, it has to do with the market. Therefore, the market drive the process. So in this component of job creation and leading the business, the economy, we have to look into policies. That is one. And what kind of sectors do we have today in the economy that are going to lead others? They have to act as champions. Faustin has mentioned that 91% of the employees we have today, they are from informal sectors. If you look at the rate of the companies that are collapsing, one of the reasons of the collapse is the managerial skills. Two, problem-solving component. Actually, these two, the managerial skills and problem-solving at all levels, from senior levels up to the middle levels. It is not just that it is in the companies. So poor planning, it is a managerial problem. Proper accounting systems is a problem. And then at the end of the day, you find that everyone has become a part of the problem. The manager is blaming the staff are blaming the managers. You see, the CEO, the boss is not on the ground. So there is that blame game problem. If we are going to solve this kind of scenario, we need a strategy that has to see where do we have a competitive advantage from a sectorial perspective. Be manufacturing, be services, be construction. Thank you.
Actually, I had another question when Francois Ngoboka presented. He gave quite a number of examples that some employers, not Rwandan employers, they no longer care about workers, but they rather look at their productivity and the profit making. That is the objective of every investor or employer. He has given some examples, if I remember well, Nike and so on. How do you think the private sector will balance the future of work and technology as far as employment is concerned, but also capital intensive is concerned?
There are certain things we shouldn't shy away from. Rwandan private sector, even the other sectors, are not living in isolation of others. We are living in a global village. We see what is happening in the other sectors. Before Industrial Revolution, 90% were employed in agriculture. When the Industrial Revolution took place, there was a shift to the manufacturing. When the technology into manufacturing, people shifted from manufacturing. Chemical engineers, they went into services. All this technical work, they shifted. So what is happening today is not new. People are going to shift because they are looking at the survival and sustainability of their business. The first thing I have just mentioned is if you don't have a business sustainability strategy, then we will not even talk about the decent job. You must have a sustainable business that is there for long-term period, and then we look at the job survival, whether it is decent and not decent. But I think we need the job first before it is determined.
I get you well. Business first, more jobs, and then better jobs. Thank you. Now the question goes to Manzi. Manzi, you've been working for trade unions for 18 last years. But when you see the global trends, it's like the mandate of trade unions is shifting from being advocacy-based to other factors, like if I can mention, now you are going even to the obligation, maybe through ensuring the job security and employability, among others, through capacity development and collective bargaining, to increase productivity and incomes. So what is the preparedness of the trade unions towards the global shift? Because the global shift is now towards productivity, employability. How do you think you just to expand your mandate to go in line with the future of work, but also with our national strategy for transformation goals of productivity first?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, honorable ministers, honorable member of parliament, distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to remind you that as in the first presenter said, the labor is not a commodity to sell on the lowest price in the market. Workers are human beings who have rights, needs, and aspirations. I think the other thing I'm happy in the global report of Future of Work, they mention it to seize the moment to revigorating the social contract. And Future of Work is based on human-centered agenda. It's very important in our discussion. Because as a trade union, if I considered some of intervention of Ngoboka or my friend come from the PSF, I would like to remind that as a trade union, it's time for us to play a role to build how future of work and to reinvigorate how social contract, which will give us to redistribute benefits of growth. Is very important as a basis. Then, after, I think it's very important to mention that we need to address challenge on high rate of informal employment, youth unemployment or underemployment, respect of labor rights, access to social security rights, wage adapted on living costs and based on economic growth and productivity. And if you pass through the three recommendations of the report, I agree with we must to adapt our education skills based on our needs in the labor market and prioritize maybe the lifelong learning and prior learning certification. It's a good basis in Rwanda because we have a best practice in terms of prior learning certification. Other things, it's very important to mention, to investing in digital technology are open up the new opportunity, of course. However, adopting a human-in-command approach to artificial intelligence that ensure that the final decision affecting work are taken by human beings. It's very important to mention. And I think in the context, while the context changed, I think we must encourage the partnership between government and private sector in terms of they can contribute and funding to ensure the transition from school to work, especially for young people, is very important.
I have get you very well. The key message is there is no increased productivity without human capital because it is the key factor of production.
I think it's very important.
The investment in capital, in human capital is
very
important.
Is it, yes.
Now I've got it very well. Now the next question goes to Director. The ILO report on the future of work recommends countries and social partners to raise strategic investment at national and regional levels towards social development, labor and employment promotion as a key tool for poverty reduction. How does ILO play its role in ensuring that young people get more, but also better jobs? In other words, decent and productive jobs. And how do you ensure social dialogue and tripartism remain relevant to the world of work for the future?
Thank you, Moderator, Honorable Ministers. The beauty of my presentation is advantaged by the fact that we have already presented as ILO. But it is also pertinent to note that within this room, we have governing board members of the ILO, those who make policy. We have the Honorable Minister, and we have Mr. Eric Manzi. So these issues, in terms of the ILO, as Anthony stated, did not start yesterday. They started in 1919. And the first convention from that conference was the hours of work, which means there was an agreement between governments, employers, and workers that the hours of work had to be standardized and therefore remove the element of modern slavery, so to speak. We normally brag to say that the ILO brought you the weekend, the 40-hour week. So when you enjoy your weekend, it's courtesy of the ILO. But as Denzel Washington stated that, and I quote, just because you are doing a lot more doesn't mean you are getting a lot more done. Don't confuse movement with progress. End of quote. There is a perception that by sweating, we are producing results. By having conferences, meetings, reports, we are producing results. The ILO's position is that results are interpreted from the people. How your people live, how your people even smile, walk around, you can actually point at development, not statistics per se. Yes, statistics are good as a basis, but more often than not, statistics are meant for the shelves. Having said that, it is also critical, as my colleague stated, that ILO is a tripartite organization where negotiations and tripartism are key. And we say that this is anchored on social dialogue. And we normally say that the first entry point to negotiations is social dialogue. When social dialogue fails, the second entry point is social dialogue. When the second entry point fails, the third and last point is social dialogue. So we cannot avoid social dialogue.
So my director, if I can ask you a related question. Do you think social protection flows can work, how can it work in sub-Saharan countries? If you look at the context, I saw among the recommendation of the report, the social protection flows for all. Do you think this is possible, or how do you think it can be contextualized?
Well, my immediate reaction is to say that as we talk about social protection, every second that ticks away points to your getting old, my moderator. And imagine what will you be without social protection at the end of the day. So the challenge is, when we are talking of social protection, we are referring to them who have no social protection, not to them and us. It's a collective. We are glorifying the issue of social protection globally. But let me highlight to the fact that according to the social protection report of last year, in Africa, only 17% are fully covered in terms of social protection. So we still have a lot to do, a long way to go. Yes, it's nice to sing with others as a chorus to say social protection, social protection, but we need to situate that to our own situations. And I salute what I heard from the perspectives vis-a-vis the strategies in terms of trying to implement the social protection agenda. But the fact of the matter is that only 17% are covered in Africa, and ILO is extremely worried.
Thank you very much. I think this discussion is very important, but the time is not on our side. I'm conscious. I think we can now open the floor to the audience. If there are some specific questions or even recommendations or guidance from the high table, we can still receive them in 5 minutes, if any. So the floor is open to the audience. Any question from the audience or someone there? While waiting for the question, I saw the Korean slogan, make every Korean happy through employment. So I ask all panelists, how do you think we can make all Rwandans happy through employment? Everybody will have 30 seconds before we close the discussion. Just one thing you think can be done and we make all Rwandans happy through employment. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm called Abdoni Hwatanyi. I'm from Trade Union. My question is open to the panelists. It's about social protection. If you talk in Africa where only 17% are covered on social protection, how are we going to bring together almost these three, where there is a social protection? When you have this, it's a good opportunity, but to me sometimes also it's a challenge. The issue of new technology, whereby many people or some people are losing their jobs, where there is lack of permanent employment and sometimes contract. When we come to Rwanda, today we don't have even the minimum wage. How are we going to bring those and having social protection, having decent work, as well as productivity?
Thank you very much. The question goes to Manzi. Apart from being head of Confederation of Rwanda Trade Unions, he also has been a member in the government board of the ILO, and he has been in the development of the future of work. So Manzi, could you respond? Maybe a director will also compliment you.
Thank you. I think the response is very clear. I think my friend Abdon asked the question which he probably have the response. I think in terms of the social protection, etc., I think we need to see how we can, to improve our wage policies here in Rwanda or in Africa. We need to revitalize through the proper application of statutory minimum wages and collective bargaining, to restructure our social system and extend coverage to a large part of the population excluded, especially actually the rural workers and formal economy workers. I think it's a good vision or objective. We can work on it in terms of to see how to have a sustainable social protection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Director, do you have anything to add?
Well, the issue of social protection is not a wonder. It's a process. I think in terms of the Decent Wage Country program, the focus is towards that direction. And the development agenda of the country, I was happy to note that there is long-term savings scheme in the pipeline. There is also social security law, which is being earmarked for the 8-hour week. We are still having problems. But the fact that we have laws in place, it gives us a guide and a starting point in terms where to go. It also relies on our capability to marshal our resources in terms of what is available. The economists would always say that you eat what you grow. So what we have as a country will determine the level of social security and the processes.
I get you. So you also wanted to mention that it is contextual. I got you. It is
Yes.
contextual.
Yes.
If 19 above % of Rwandese have the health insurance scheme, isn't that a part of social security? I just want to give floor to Deje Nilda to also talk something about that.
I think moderator, you've made the point that I wanted to make, which is we need to decolonize the idea of social protection. We often think that social protection is RSSB. It's not. RSSB is just a minute piece of social protection. If we get every Rwandan to save from their airtime using mobile money, save a little bit of money for the future, that is social protection. We have one of the most sophisticated social protection systems via Mutuelle. So I think trying to match the notion of social protection of the West does not apply to this context. But if we're able to develop tools and ways to help our people who are in the informal sector save as they make money, as is being done in Ejoheza, then we have a social protection system.
I think you responded very well, and we have a 5-year country program. That's a good news for Abdon. If I don't see anyone requesting a microphone, I think we can, there is someone, the final one, behind. Sorry. There is someone here.
Thank you. I'm called Rachel and I'm from ITM Africa. ITM Africa is a nature farm. So my first question is, what careers should Rwandans or humans be focused on and training for to ensure long-term employment rather than graduating and you find that robots have taken everything? I'm just kidding. But instead of graduating and retrain in other things or in other sectors. Another question is, I think it will go to the ILO director. Assuming that robots will likely replace most low complexity jobs, what kind of impact will a mature robotic industry have on the environment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the question of a career, what will be the new careers to fill the gap or to avoid the reconversion, the future reconversions? I think Godfrey is in a better position to respond to that question. What will be the future careers that can be advised as far as the planning of education is concerned?
Thank you for the good question. I think it's a bit difficult to pick a specific career. I mean, everybody can. I wouldn't sit here and lie to you that I've projected all that. But I think the important thing is to look at what are the skills that we need for the future. We talked about it earlier in our presentations that we know where the world is going. Much focus is actually on how do you solve problems, how can you be a critical thinking person, how can you innovate. So there's you could say this or that, but in the future, it's really about, I think, do you have that foundation that allows you to move with the emerging trends in whatever sectors you are. Of course, there will be those high-paying jobs that we know, like software developers, programmers, all those kind of things that could be very high earning because of what we see today. But technology is changing, the world is changing, things are adapting. So I think the most important thing is to have the right foundation, that whatever career that we are pursuing, we are actually focusing on the problem solving, the critical thinking, the innovative capacity.
I think it's very hard to project the jobs of the future, and people who try, if you really look at the jobs that they're talking about, they're not jobs, they're actually skills. If you look at the WEF report and some of these reports, global reports. For example, 10 years ago, we had predicted that liberal arts related careers would disappear because everybody would be going to high tech and finance. And if you look today, there's a big increase in demand for liberal arts. Why? Because as we look at automation, issues of ethics are coming back. Issues of, what is the role of the human at the center of what you do. So you have universities, for example, I know there's a university in Canada that made, or there's a place in Canada that made ethics classes compulsory for all architecture graduates. It's not an obvious match that architecture and ethics would go together, but if we're thinking of a human-centered society, then it makes a lot of sense. So I think anybody will tell you that they can project what kind of jobs will be on the market in 30 years are probably lying to you. But the point that Godfrey is making is whatever job you do, if you're able to add value based on technology, even if it's not a technology job, is probably a job that will survive. The jobs that we know are going to slowly disappear, including in Rwanda, are jobs that are based on routine. So if somebody's job is just routine-based, we already know that these jobs are going to be disappearing. The same way we've seen like secretaries disappear, and now you have executive assistants that are not your typical secretaries, because what secretaries used to do, Google can do for you now, right? So anything that is routine-oriented, any person who's in this business will tell you that job is most likely to disappear.
So that means the career guidance will also be dynamic. We also got in line with the new changes. I just want to ask Director to briefly address the question of robots versus environment. We were talking about versus employment, now it comes to environment.
Well, it's justified fear, but sometimes it's fear of the unknown because of the way we propagate the development. Take, for example, traffic policemen used to be human beings until the advent of the robot, and we are living with it. I used to work for the railways. We used to have signalmen until we graduated to signals, which were robots. As we speak, Japan is more advanced in terms of robots. Are we saying that there are no workers in Japan? Canada is recruiting en masse, but they are robots, for example. So I think it's a way of us being able to foretell and plan ahead. And the other challenge is that, like my sister said, we tend to borrow from the international community and take that hook, line, and sinker, whereas we need to situate to our own countries, right? So this is what has to happen. But it also the way we market or we propagate the future. Yeah. Right. So we need to package the message in order to sell the message to our own nationals. On a parting shot, let me give my own experience in terms of the future of work. As you stated in the introductory remarks, I started as an apprentice fitter, including machining, qualified as a diesel plant fitter, working on steam locomotives. When diesels were being introduced, we were reskilled to work on diesel locomotives. When diesel locomotives were being phased out at most, we were reskilled to work on electric locomotives. So nobody lost a job because of the planning. And when you talk to employers, they have these human resource planning strategies. So I think as countries, we must adopt that.
Thank you very much, Director. We have the last question, just the last question. Or if the question was responded, we can just go to...
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. My name is Henry Karenzi from NGF Consort. My question goes to the Director General of NIRDA. We have been talking about the future of work, that is decent work. So when we look at our youth, when they engage in employability activities, they start some local factories like breweries, as you have been talking. So how is it inspection about the factories related to our environmental friendly? Because we are talking of sustainability, environmentally, and also the decent work. So how do you inspect in regard to our environment as well as the sustainability in terms of work, decent work? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, the Rwanda Standards Bureau does inspection, and part of what they look at, of course, is whether you're polluting or not polluting as a company. Our job at NILDA is basically to give them access to technology to make sure that they do not pollute, and give them access to appropriate technology. One of the things that have been missing from our firms, our small firms, and our startups is how do we use technology to actually create more jobs and create more opportunities for their own businesses. So we have a tendency to look at technology as something that you consume, but not necessarily something that you absorb within your own factory to try to increase your productivity and try to increase your sales. So our job is to go factory to factory, according to different value chains, and actually give them advice on how they can use the technology to cut costs and sell more. And of course, be green or be environmentally friendly. So REMA and RSB do the inspection and the regulation, and it's a very important function. And we do the promotion in terms of acquisition of technology.
Thank you very much. Just want to remind that the shift, the creation of industries has disappeared. 15% of jobs, but created 23% of jobs in services. It's just the shift. We are going to close if there is no other guidance from the high table on the discussed topic. But before we close, just want to give 30 seconds each to tell us from your respective institutions, why do you think is needed to make everyone happy through employment? We start from Director, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. We must produce 2 in 1. That is employers and prospective employees.
Thank you.
Then just to clarify one point, my 17% social protection cover is in terms of full social protection, not just social protection in terms of branches, but full social protection. So it must be construed in that perspective.
Thank you very much. CEO.
To those who have a job, you have to change the attitude. You must have a positive attitude on the job you have. To those who are looking for the job, for the time being, once you get the job, be a problem solver, not part of the problem.
Thank you very much. SCG Manzi.
Thank you. My conclusion is it's our imperative responsibility as actors of a world of work to unite, to shape our future of work in Rwanda, adapted to our needs and our vision. It's also the responsibility to future generation to create more decent jobs in Rwanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. DG?
Yeah, I think on a serious note, I think involvement and being able to be creative in your work and make decisions is a big important source of happiness. On a lighter note, I think my elder brother from ILO could add another day to the weekend.
Another day to the weekend. Thank you.
I support Godfrey's idea. But I think just to supplement what the other speakers have mentioned, if we can start thinking of our own businesses and our own youth and how technology can create new opportunities, either in terms of products, access to markets, how we change our businesses to embrace this new technology, to make more money and create more decent jobs, then we'll have made a big jump.
Thank you very much, honorable ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is the end of the panel. I just want you to join me to thank our deserved panelists for the very good discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, members of the panel. You can take your seat. My job is very complicated now. I think within our performance management, I'm at a very high risk, because by now we should be winding up, but it was very, very difficult to part ways with this conversation. Please join me to give another round of applause to our panelists. I assume the take home is not another day of the weekend. I think it is the productivity. It's what matters, not how long we spend on the work, it's what we do with the work. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to introduce the second panel, which is going to be the last of the day. And this panel is going to discuss on the need to link education with the labor market needs. Allow me to call upon the moderator of this panel, Mrs. Novella Nikwigize. Please join me on the floor. Nikwigize is a media personality and news anchor on the Rwanda National TV, and she is the host of weekly shows in French and English. She has been a consultant for several years, working on gender and development issues for the United Nations organizations, NGOs, and consultancy firms. And she's currently a communication program consultant at UN Women. In the interest of time, I'm going to be less democratic, and I'm going to give you 30 minutes for both the presentation and this panel discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, join me to give another round of applause to Mrs. Nikwigize. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, MC. Good afternoon. So this is me standing between you and your lunch. I will try to be as brief as possible, but also try and have the discussion really achieve its objectives. I would like to call, without further ado, Mr. Ivan Murenzi, Deputy Director General of NISR, who has also worked at Access to Finance Rwanda, supported the financial sector policy at the Ministry of Finance and Central Bank, but also worked with PwC, IPAR, etc. And he will share some of the insights from the presentation from here, just next to me. Thank you. I would like to welcome Dr. James Gashumba, who is the Vice Chancellor of Rwanda Polytechnic. Before that, he has also been the head of the Nyagatare campus of the University of Rwanda. He served and serves on several advisory committees and board of directors. He is a veterinarian, you wouldn't guess, by education and training, and he has MSc and PhD from the University of London. Let's welcome him on the panel with a round of applause. I would like to welcome also Professor Nelson Ijumba, who is the the Deputy Vice Chancellor at University of Rwanda. He has a PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Strathclyde. This is a tongue twister in itself. And he has also been a DVC at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Much welcome, Professor Ijumba. And I would like also to welcome Ms. Josephine Nyiranzeimana, who's going to ensure that we have more gender equality on this panel. She's the Government Chief Information Officer at RISA. Before that, she has also worked at the former Ministry of Youth and ICT, but also been in charge of ICT private sector development as a principal senior technologist. She worked with Intel Corporation, Clinton Health, and she has an Master of Science in Information Technology from Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome on the panel. And last but definitely not least, Ms. Christelle Kwizera, who is an entrepreneur who's going to help keep the youth or the medium age
probably to manageable levels. You're 25, and she's a mechanical engineer and social entrepreneur who founded Water Access Rwanda, providing over 100,000 Rwandans with water, and who received, among others, the prestigious Africa Entrepreneurship Award. Welcome on the panel. So as we have heard, and I think all the numbers have been given, all the key information have been given of what we're facing in terms of challenge, unemployment, underemployment, and really just a mismatch between what we're training or what the education system and training systems is producing and what the labor market actually needs. I would like to start with you, Professor Ijumba. 13.6% of graduates are unemployed. Some people would say that we're training future unemployed young people, and some people have argued that it would be easier to have very short and professionalizing trainings than long cursuses that might not necessarily lead to direct employment. What's your stance on that, or the university's stance on that?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, moderator and honorable ministers and participants to this important forum. In terms of your question, I would like to have it in two parts. Probably respond to your last comment about concentrating on short-term training rather than higher-level training. I think as a country that would be a wrong strategy, because short-term training address specific needs, but when you look at university or high-level training, you actually equip graduates to respond to different scenarios that are changed. So I wouldn't advise for people to go for short-term training. It's very wrong for the country.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay,
and probably you'll come back to that comment just in a second.
Okay.
But I wanted to, we are talking about the skills that the labor market needs. Mr. Murenzi, could you probably give us a sense, we've talked about the global level, could you give us a sense of the current status in Rwanda of the labor market, and what are the needs that Professor Ijumba has to cater for in the education curriculum?
Thank you. I had a presentation, but I've just requested for one slide, which I can say will summarize the situation in Rwanda and how all of us get a good understanding of different aspects that we've been talking about. When we say the working population in Rwanda and internationally, we are mainly talking about 16 years and above. And the number in Rwanda is about 7 million. So if you can look at the slide above. And then when we talk about the labor force and the outside of labor force, in this case, we mean, with the new definition of ILO, we exclude the people who are in subsistence agriculture, who are mainly doing agriculture for their own consumption, and those in school who obviously by the fact that they are not in school, they cannot get time for work, and the elderly and disabled. Those are outside of the labor force by the new definition, and that's about 3.3 million. And so the left is the labor force, which is about 3.7 million. And you can break that also in several parts where we are talking about the employed and the unemployed, which is a key issue to obviously deal with. And so with that breakdown, coming to your question, I think it helps when we begin talking of the unemployment rates and the employment to population ratio, and specifically speaking of the unemployment rate and how it could be connected to education. Right now we have an unemployment rate of about 14.5%, given the new definition. And I think that's in line with the government's plan and ambition for decent and better jobs, whereby it may seem high given the previous numbers that were used to, which would be about 4.8%. And Rwanda, we would say in the region is the country that actually has so far adopted this definition. But when you compare that to another country like South Africa, which has adopted this definition, which is about 26.5% unemployment rate, I think the situation is not that bad. However, there is really a lot to be done because that unemployment rate translates to about 600 Rwandans who have no job, and mainly it's mainly associated with people who have low levels of education in terms of primary, secondary, and those who have also not been to school. So it's very much correlated, associated with the education that we have offered to our people in the country. And I think, as has been discussed, if there's more effort invested in the education and skills, there is a big chance that people can then create themselves the jobs, not necessarily be employees. And I think education definitely will play a big role.
I think we will talk about going more into entrepreneurship just in a second, but you have said that unemployment is linked with no education, but still the number of, or the percentage, or the proportion of graduates is just slightly below the average. So what are the specificities of the graduates that are unemployed?
Sure, I think to that small portion, you're right, the percentages are not that good. I mean, the specificities are two. One is to do with the fact that the opportunities at that level, the opportunities for employment are very slim, mainly public sector education, public sector government. The private sector at that level, really not much. And then the other thing is to do with just the culture of young people not necessarily, and I'm happy to have Christelle here, not being creators of the work and more like being focused to search for jobs. And I think at that level also it's also connected to, again, the other key skills that the previous speakers were talking about in terms of problem solving and being innovative. I think those are the underlying issues that someone can go into.
Okay. 2 years into the establishment of Rwanda Polytechnic, we are moving towards a hands-on skills development, TVET as a way of the future. 2 years down the road, what has been the journey and what can we learn going forward?
Thank you, moderator. Thank you, honorable ministers. Actually, we are 15 months since we started, not exactly 2 years. And I think the policy makers made the right decision to put a lot of focus on the way we train our workforce. Hitherto, there was an overly academic-oriented way of preparing our workforce, but actually workforce, even the name workforce, it's to do work, to do things, not just sit and think that things will happen and other people will do the work. There's this tendency, I'm educated, I'll sit in an office and make other people work. Actually, we should be thinking that every one of us wants to be a worker using skills, and those skills can, when we talk about hands-on, it's the things we do in order to make the machinery of our economy move. And when we look at countries which have gone a little further than us, you see that they really emphatically and decisively invested heavily in training their workforce. And in a different way. We are now having to train our workforce in a different way. People have been talking about ways of learning, which are more to do with problem solving, innovation, and using our head, but to do work. So that's where we are going. We have a new system called the competence-based way of teaching, meaning that the student-centered learning is what is taking over. So young people learn from doing work, and we want to engage with industry so that our students spend more time, actually probably 60% at workplace learning, instead of spending too much time at school. So that's where we are going. We are making some headway. There are still many challenges because TVET education is extremely expensive. But we shall talk about that later, maybe. Thank you.
Definitely. A last point before you leave the mic, maybe. There has been also concern on once these young people arrive on the labor market, still have issues, be it in terms of the standards of what they should know or how they should do things. How do you address that at your level?
We are very mindful about that, and we already really know the problem, where the problem is. You see, traditionally, we get students, even in a TVET institution, come to learn, but their teachers are essentially academicians. They are academicians. Some of them have never been to a factory. They've never been on a factory floor. And we want our students to learn from a teacher who takes notes, who writes on the blackboard. That's a wrong way of teaching. And that's where we say that industry should really be in the driving seat, because industry, the employer, is the consumer in this case. And the old way of saying, you produce the product and I'll come and pick it off the shelf, like buying a piece of bread. No, we say, you, the employer, come to the kitchen, help me to bake this bread you want, this package, instead of us. In most cases, we are not very well equipped as much as the employer or the workplace or the factory. So that's why we want to engage with Steve Ruzibiza and his chambers and all that, and they participate with us in training. They actually should be demanding. They are the ones who are supposed to be demanding that we want this quality of a graduate. But yes, we are going to participate in training him or her. And therefore, they open their factories or their industries for us to take our students there. So they spend there probably 50 or 60% of their time. That's our target. Honorable Minister is there. I'm promising this, so I'm sure he'll hold me to this, that by 2024, we want 60% of our young people going towards TVET, because they'll be seeing satisfaction in this. They work, they get jobs easily, because the industry has participated in training, and therefore it's easy for those same people to employ the same people they have participated in training. Thank you.
Indeed. So we'll be speaking again probably in 5 years. But just before that, you were talking about the training of the teachers themselves. And I would like to bring it back to Professor Ijumba. Because we're talking about new ways, and the DG of NIRDA has talked about it. It's not so much the curricula, but the way of teaching. How do we create a student-centered environment and a learning environment that is really adapted and that provides that flexibility? And we've talked about synergies with the private sector, with the industries. As probably the major university in Rwanda, how do you integrate some of the concerns of the labor market?
Yeah, thank you very much for coming back to me, because then I would be able to answer your first part of the question. The high unemployment rate is basically as a result of a disjuncture between supply and demand in terms of knowledge and skills. And the response of universities and TVETs has to be in terms of how to produce graduates who will be relevant to the industry. And industry, I'm being broad. It could be a factory, it could be a business, could be a farm, could be even a hospital. So the way to respond and the way many universities are responding is in three ways. One is the curriculum change and capacity building of the staff. Why curriculum change? Curriculum change is necessary because you need the knowledge currency. You don't want to teach old things that are irrelevant to the graduates, but also in terms of integrating skills development in what knowledge acquisition. And many universities are approaching this by integrating innovation and entrepreneurship in the curriculum. Because somebody who has entrepreneurial skills, somebody who is innovative, has certain characteristics which we need to develop into our graduates. And these are sometimes referred to as soft skills, but more these days they are increasingly being called power skills. There is, for example, creative thinking, problem solving, communication, teamwork, understanding multidisciplinary approach, but also project planning and environmental awareness. Those are very important. The second part, which also requires upskilling of our lecturers, is that they need to understand what Dr. Gashumba has called problem-based learning. Some people call it challenge-driven education, whereby students actually learning by solving actual problems in the community. So it's no longer theoretical. The second aspect which universities are doing, this first part is largely up to the universities and higher learning institutions. The second part requires partnerships. This is recognition of the need of professional training, which Dr. Gashumba has alluded to. It requires partnerships with industry, partnership with government, and the institutions themselves. The reason is the government makes policies. For example, now we have the workplace learning policy, which is very good, but it has had some challenge in terms of having proper guidelines and legal frameworks to apply it. But also, the attachment parts, this practical training, it is essential that staff also understand what is in industry, but also within the institutions, the industrial training and practical training must be handled by academics, not by career guidance offices, because academics need to know that it is integrated into the curriculum. The second part, of course, as I said, is collaboration between the industry in terms of understanding the places. So in this case, we believe through these approaches, we'll be able to produce employable graduates. With an employable graduate, somebody who can either be employed, that is recruited, but also somebody who can work on his or her own, means self-employed, but also employing others. The third aspect, which is also very important, is that the relationship between a university and the graduate should not end when the person graduates. There is a need to continue engaging because of the continuous professional development, or what some people call it lifelong learning, because our graduates need to continue upskilling their knowledge. Now we are talking of AI, robotics, 5G. So if people don't get that upskills, and if the university is not involved in those aspects, we believe would have let down our graduates. So I think that's the approach which many universities are doing. UR is doing it, but I think that's the way to ensure that our graduates don't feel lost when they come out of the higher learning institutions. Thank you.
Great, and I'm very glad that you talk about AI and new technologies, because as we've seen, technology is not only the threat that we want to present, but also an opportunity, and has been creating jobs. I would like to bring it to you, Ms. Nyiranzeyimana. I think we've talked about ICT-enabled labor market, ICT-enabled processes, businesses, etc. But this requires to mainstream technology across the board, from kindergarten to the farms to employees, but also to entrepreneurs like Christelle. So how do we achieve that, and what are the opportunities that we might not be seizing at their full potential with technology?
Thank you, moderator, honorable ministers, dear participants. To the question I'm asked to maybe address, I would want to use an example. Taking, for instance, the teachers that we have today that are helping us develop the future employers or employees. If I'm a teacher, I graduated from the College of Education in 2010. Maybe I didn't have a chance to own a computer while I was still studying. But today I'm required to teach the kids who have some knowledge on mobile phones or who are already using computers in the classroom to do their assignments or to access various resources online. So it's a bit challenging to the teachers, but this applies to other fields as well. I'm an accountant, I have an ATM machine that is threatening me to take on my job. But also my company maybe is acquiring systems and developing applications that our clients are lacking most. And I'm really not fit into that particular job. Like I feel a bit threatened. So how do we support that teacher? How do we strengthen the skills of that accountant? How do we build capacity of the doctor who's maybe having 5 gadgets in front of him or her that are digitally enabled or supposed to help him perform his job? So it requires a bit of digital skills development in another way. So we've been waiting for getting on job and then start adapting, start learning how to use a computer or learn how to use a certain system that is deployed in the particular company. And we've seen the education system not really doing much in terms of coupling the digital skills with other basic skills. Yet the employment or the jobs of today and the future will require high level or big, various skills, various digital skills beyond maybe operating a computer simply. So this means that our education system needs to adapt a bit and then be open to certain change. Like you said, from kindergarten to higher learning institution, people only learn programming when they are in computer-related courses. But today, we'll see the future jobs like being a doctor, requiring to have some certain level of programming skills, or being a teacher or an accountant, requiring to have some levels of programming skills. So this is changes that are not, I would say, planned for, but they are real. They are challenging our education system, but again, we need to adapt. So I would say that we need to network, collaborate, like the previous speakers said, the private sector get engaged with the academia and even the government to really collaboratively or together put efforts to address the ever-raising needs of this changing digital world.
Thank you very much. And I think it's very clear that, of course, technology and the ICT skills have to really be embedded at all, in all different elements. But I would like to bring it to you now. You are in a generation that is being told not to wait for a job from the government. You are trained, you are educated, and then you're told, go and create your job, basically. And yet we see that a number of entrepreneurs and startups die, most of them die in the first year or so. What, for you, are the key challenges that entrepreneurship still hold and that should be probably put down for entrepreneurship to really contribute to creating more jobs as we want?
Yeah, thank you, honorable ministers. So just to give you a little bit of background on Water Access Rwanda, I founded it in 2014 with the desire to employ young people. and using them as solution providers in the water sector. So we were always committed on employment. Now we employ 53 people, mainly young. 85% are below the age of 35, and the average age across the company is 29. I can tell successfully I just hired a younger manager than me. She's 23. So I'm celebrating that. But I'd like to echo what other people have said again. There is a lack of skill on the market, especially managerial skills, problem solving, autonomy skills, business intelligence among the new hires we're getting. So let's always think about the conversation. When you tell a young person to go create their own job, sometimes we tend to forget they're gonna have to hire other people. So if we don't fix the skills that young graduates are coming to the market having, we're also destroying the chances of the entrepreneurs. Our growth as a company was our first 3 years, we couldn't go beyond 5 employees because we all know the boss is the customer. So if you have employees who are unable to bring you a market, who are unable to interact with the customers, deliver, meet deadlines, which that's another lacking skill, then you won't be able to grow. So growing to 53 employees has required not a new technology, not a novel way of doing things, but hiring the right people who are able to grow the company, and be able to grow those under them. So it's very critical that when we talk about youth entrepreneurship, we also know that those businesses are gonna create jobs. They're gonna need qualified people to work with as well. And I still see this as a major barrier. I'll just give you a simple story about a key position in any company, a position around financial planning and analysis. When I started the company, I could not believe when graduates with upper class honors from SFB could not do a simple payroll calculation, do a cash flow analysis for the company, numbers I needed to know to make decisions in my business. Fast forward, now we're getting ready for investment. I need somebody to tell me this is how much equity you should sell, this is your exit. I mean, all these things that I don't have the background for. But we've literally spent 2 years without a person, and we've had so much turnover because every person we've got with good recommendation, unfortunately, is not able to actually deliver on that. I went around, maybe even some people in the room, I was desperately looking for a finance person. I still don't have them. And we've had to rely as a company on outside people coming to volunteer for 3 months, 6 months, consult with us to be able to meet our needs. So I'm using that as an illustration because many graduates now coming out of high school, only the ones who are low performing are going in the financial fields. Because we always think, okay, if I get good grades, I'm gonna be an engineer, a doctor. And I grew up out of that system. That's why I became an engineer. But thinking back, I should have went straight to business. But I also loved engineering. So there is a lot around what's keeping young entrepreneurs from not being successful, and definitely skilled employees is a major part of that. And we should always be careful about encouraging people to create their own employment, because it's not for those who are not able to secure employment only. Actually, entrepreneurship requires a certain skill set, a certain mindset, a certain level of malleability, skills you need to have to be able to navigate around different words. So as an entrepreneur, you can run a business in biotech, you can run a business in agriculture, you can run a business in accounting, you can run many different businesses. That's why you always end up with serial entrepreneurs who seem to be successful with anything they take on. So that requires a specific skill. So anyways, there's so much around this conversation on youth employment, and I always hate to always be the young person that people use as a successful example of why everybody should go entrepreneurship. And I like your question that you're asking, why are many failing? And many are gonna fail. That's the reality in all markets around the world. Most businesses don't survive. But how do we ensure that the people starting businesses now in Rwanda, young people like myself, have the right people to help them go forward? Because we already have the resources. We have access to financing. We have good supportive policy framework in Rwanda. We were given a high table in this country. But internal issues, being able to meet deadlines, service customers to the best of their expectation. Those are things that your employees are going to deliver on. And unfortunately, it seems the entrepreneur is always navigating those roles. And I feel many of my friends who are entrepreneurs and others, there is this feeling that employees are just not delivering on that rather than being a driver for your growth, hiring the wrong person, which hiring the right person takes forever, but hiring the wrong person basically can stop you and destroy you as a business.
Thank you very much. I think that really sums up some of the issues and critical issues that we're having. And I would like, just before, because we are really having a very short time, I would like to throw this banana to you, both Dr. Gashumba and Professor Ijumba, for one word, in response probably to some of the challenges that she's getting and that many people are getting in hiring the right people with the right skill sets. What is and what should be the game changer in just one word?
The game changer for me is partnership. In training that person, let the employer be part responsible.
So we're
we
playing the ping pong game of banana peel. So it's coming back to you, Christelle. You have to be involved in the process of training them. Professor Ijumba?
Thank you very much. I think the game changer for me is effective partnership, as he's saying. And in terms of universities or higher learning institutions, offering what is relevant. That to me is key. And if you want to know what is relevant, you must engage with the people who are supposed to be receiving your products. It's like any market. That is, previously, universities used to train, hoping that people find their way somewhere there. But I think we need to change that approach. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. You wanted to intervene, Josephine.
I want to elaborate a bit on the partnership or, the involvement of the private sector in the education of the future potential employers or employees. Dr. Ijumba mentioned of the attachment, industrial attachment, that young students go to companies to train for internship also. But there's something that we need to tackle. The concept of having interns or internees as redundant resources in institutions. So if you are recruiting interns without a proper planning or having clear job description for 1 month or 2 months that the internee will spend there, how do you expect to, get the intern sit next to a professional whose job is to deliver on the specific task assigned, not to train the internee and really get the practice or the practical skills after that training. So there has to be some deliberate efforts in better planning our internships and really follow up and support interns throughout that period when they are in companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing that up. Be it internships, but also apprenticeship have to be made in an intentional manner to really deliver what they are expected. I will give it to the floor for just one question, one burning question if we have one. And right before I see a hand in the back. So that will make it 2 questions, a hand in the back and here. And just before that, I would like to bring you, Mr. Murenzi, in terms of planning ahead. We're talking about adequation or matching the education today with the jobs of tomorrow. But we need to know what skills are required tomorrow. So what would be your word in terms of what are the critical elements that the labor market should fulfill or should need for the education system to fulfill today?
I think I risk repeating what was earlier shared, but the skills, what we've discussed, but if you allow, moderator, I would want to just add another dimension. From this conversation, and we're all here from various backgrounds, what I take away is the responsibility we all have in solving this. And I think in our context, I see the need for us to be more tolerant in terms of, indeed, in hiring and allowing people to come and learn. Sometimes our expectations are always very high, yet most times we didn't necessarily also start from that level. We started somewhere, definitely. Given the context and the underlying issues that we have in the system, as it evolves, as we allow time for the system to evolve and develop those critical skills, we need to give chances. And we've seen in our field, I'll speak for the National Institute of Statistics, we are a very technical institution in terms of the analytics that we expect from staff. When they graduate with a bachelor's degree in statistics, surely by the time they come in our institution, we don't see much in terms of the work that we have them. It takes us about 5 years to empower someone to be analytical enough to manage a survey. But that's what we had, and we have to invest continuously in those people, but the potential is there. And I think once we are tolerant and be accommodative and walk along with people, we can gradually come to the levels that we expect.
Thank you very much. So we have one question there. Just state your name, where you're coming from, and just 10 seconds for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Sezira Janet, a student in the University of Rwanda, Gikondo campus. Yeah, it's not a question, but I would like to supplement on what Clistella talked about. Yeah, it's good she did engineering, but I would like to inform, I know here there are many students here. Yeah, don't think that if maybe you have done business, that for you will not be able to compete to the global market. Yeah, as long as that what have been given, like maybe you are a student doing like procurement and the human resource and marketing, if you fully utilize the package that you have been given by your lecturers, you will really do the best and you will be able to fit to the labor market. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that brings it back to the learner, the responsibility of the learner to actually utilize what they are given. There was a second question here, and then we'll have to stop there, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, honorable ministers. Mine is not a question, it's a wish. When I saw the theme, promote employment by linking education and the labor market needs, I expected the two panels to meet, because the first panel was made of mostly people of the labor market, and now the second panel is more on education, but they didn't talk to each other. So then we will keep blaming each other. I think if we need to reach where Dr. Shumba was talking about, that the industry should come in the kitchen and help cooking, we need people to sit together. Not one panel talks, laments, goes, another panel comes, laments, and goes. So we really need to bring together the market and academia and face our responsibility.
Thank you very much.
The second was about the technology. We are talking about technology, but at least I didn't say who I am. I'm Father Fabian Agenimana, I'm director or the vice chancellor of Ines Rengeri. We have moved into STEM, but among the problems we are facing, there is this of electricity. Electricity cuts are too many and destroy our gadgets. If there is no clear policy, it will be difficult to move ahead. Secondly, also the cost, not only of electricity, but also the internet. So I think these things should be addressed if we need to move to the future jobs we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think Dr. Gashumba had talked about the issue of equipment and the issue of proper infrastructure. But to come back to your question on panels lamenting and going, I think we do have more or less a diverse panel. And I would like to give it to you for the final, probably, word. And I hope that the rest of the panel will allow me to do that. As we go forward, and you are the youth, you are the leaders of today, actually, not of tomorrow. What do you think, going forward, should be the key message probably that we need to take into account as we plan, as we discuss, as we make policies going forward?
I'd say my message is to the universities, the policymakers, and to the students in the room. The future of work is to create lifelong learners who are able to adapt, learn new hard skills, and the only way to get there is to get your soft skills, the power skills right now on point. You need to be able to work by yourself and supervise, have autonomy, be good at problem solving, have a good analytical skills, meet deadlines. I can emphasize this. It's so important to be able to meet deadlines and also have business intelligence and know how to deal with clients and work in a team. So these are things that you don't just wake up and you have those skills. You won't see somebody doing this and learn it. It's something through the process of your education, through the workshops you go to, through the things you're involved with in your family, with your friends. It's a general thing you catch on as you do. So get out of your seat, go out and do things, become lifelong learners, stay curious. This is what's going to prepare you to be successful in any company, in any job, and whatever the world changes to. Thank you.
Great, thank you very, very much. I would like to ask you to thank my panel very much for keeping their remarks very brief and concise and to the point. And I think we've learned and heard over and over again. Of course, we need partnerships, we need to work together, create synergies, but also have curricula that are flexible and adapted to the world, to the labor market, but also bringing back to a student-centered education system and lifelong learners. So the onus is on all of us, actually. Those who are seeking jobs, those who are trying to create jobs, it's also a responsibility to actually learn those additional skills, but also use them, use networks, etc., to create the jobs that we would like. Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience. Sorry for rushing the discussion, but I think we can get a lot of insights and continue networking over lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Novella, for saving me. At least we have saved a little bit of time. Ladies and gentlemen, we are drawing near the end of our day, of our conference, but I'm very happy. It is a good day for our country. I've had the chance to work within the Ministry of Education back in 2008. At that time, we were talking about access. I'm very happy today that access is there, but now how can we improve the quality? It is a very, very good step forward, and I believe we have solutions to address some of the issues that were being discussed. It is now my pleasure and honor to call upon the Honorable Minister of Education to come forward and deliver us the closing remark of today's session. As you move forward, I would like to note that we are streaming live. You can find us on YouTube, Rwanda Labour, and we are on Twitter, Rwanda Labour, and Facebook, the Mifotra account. You can find our live stream. Thank you very much. Honorable Minister of Education, you are welcome.
Honorable Minister of Public Service and Labor and our guest of honor, distinguished delegates from ILO organization, distinguished senior level delegates from private institutions, as well as government institutions, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor this afternoon to provide my closing remarks at this important National Employment Forum on the future of work. I thank the organizers for the tremendous work that they have done in organizing this forum, and specifically I would like to thank the Ministry of Public Service and Labor and the regional ILO organizers for the work they have done in order to convene us here and deliberate on these important topics that we find pertinent during this era. I note that we have covered a wide range of topics that, in my opinion, are quite coherent and have talked to each other.
Several presentations, as you noted, have presented on future of work, Rwanda's context on the future of work, labor market and statistical trends, as well as linking education with the labor market. The first panel had very strong and coherent deliberations that indeed discussed the future of work in all perspectives, ranging from what is imminent and what we see in the current national and regional needs, as well as what we need to do, especially when it comes to the needs to work together as various stakeholders, including government institutions, development partners, industry, and all other stakeholders that are involved in ensuring that our current employees and employers talk together, work together, and provide opportunities that are required in the context of ever-growing and changing market needs. Indeed, the second panel provided the similar trends, particularly focusing on linking education with labor market. I note that the coherence of the two panel discussions that really talked to each other provided clear emerging contours of a new world of work in the current era, but as well as in the future fourth industrial revolution and the potential changes that are going to come a reality for millions of workers and companies around the world from time to time. The inherent opportunities for economic prosperity, societal progress, and individuals are clearly enormous and yet depend on all of us as policymakers, business leaders, to ensure that we shape our current generation to always adapt to ever new changing needs, particularly very challenging because some of the needs we will never be able to predict, as has been discussed by a number of panel discussants this morning. Education is a key to ever-changing needs, and indeed is essential to African Union 2063 agenda of a transformed continent. And all of us, as educationists, as policymakers, as private sector teams and partners, need to work together to examine the current needs, especially if we coherently work together to examine what we want to know, especially in our labor market, both nationally and regionally. But the one most important question is, how are our educational and employment systems in our institutions able to continuously adapt to digital and environmental changes of the future of work? Indeed, this is a challenge, but when I was sitting this morning, somebody sent me an article on the importance and impact of mobile technology advances that is going to ever continuously change our developing mobile economy. And therefore, the ability that we use and the skills to be adaptive and flexible to know the ever-changing demands is very critical, as has been discussed. One of the most important agenda that we must harness as a nation, but as a region as well, is that Africa should always be able to train a critical mass of people who will have the knowledge and the skills to adapt to ever-changing needs, both needs related to technology as well as other needs, so that we are able to predict the future in a much more flexible way. The government of Rwanda, led by His Excellency President Paul Kagame, has always supported us as a nation and a region on focusing on strengthening and enhancement of quality of education, but also employment needs and trends. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I note that a lot has been discussed, and therefore I would like to leave some questions that we need to reflect on as we close this forum, so that they are a basis for our discussions now and later in order to inform the outcomes of this important forum. How far advanced are we, for instance, as African countries in preparing our future force with reference to some countries that we know have advanced, particularly the Asian tiger countries like Korea, Singapore, and others? And how do we learn from them? And how do we adapt ourselves, both in our areas of employment, private sector, and industry, to ensure that we train our future generation to be innovative and adaptive to ever-growing employment needs? What can African countries learn from the experiences we gather, particularly through benchmarking of national and international institutions, specifically training institutions, universities, and regional training institutions? These are some of the questions we need to reflect on, and therefore, distinguished delegates, allow me to declare this National Employment Forum officially closed. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, one last announcement is that we are going to have lunch, so we are all invited. Our lunch will be served in the Garden of Serena Hotel, just at